الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله أما بعد. I'd like to welcome the brothers and sisters in the Atlantic City area to this second class from the book حل العقدة في شرح العمدة, which is the explanation of a book called Umdatul Fiqh by Ibn Qudama, the great scholar Ibn Qudama, rahimahullah ta'ala. He was a scholar, well-known scholar of the Hanbali madhab, and he wrote a book. He wrote several books, obviously, but he wrote a series of books, in order for the person who wants to study the madhab of Imam Ahmed. Not that it matters, but not saying that that's my, I don't ascribe to the madhab of Imam Ahmed. But of course, benefit is benefit, knowledge is knowledge. We take from the scholars, whether they be Hanbali or Shafi'i or Maliki or Hanafi, or and as long as they are true scholars, as long as they are upon the correct aqidah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and the correct minhaj of the Prophet, correct aqidah and minhaj of the Prophet and his companions, we benefit. Right is right. Whatever is in accordance with the hadith, the Quran and the Sunnah and the way of the companions, that's what we take, wherever it may come from, whether it comes from Imam Shafi'i or Imam Ahmed or Imam Malik or Abu Hanifa, Imam Abu Hanifa, rahimahumullah, or if it comes from other scholars, other imams. Layth ibn Sa'ad al-Fahmi, al-Imam, the well-known Imam, al-Imam Bukhari, al-Imam Muslim, al-Imam Dhuhli, or whether it comes from Imam Abu Dawood, al-Imam Abu Dawood, or whether it comes from Imam Abdul Razak San'ani, or whether it comes from any of the Sufyan al-Thawri, Sufyan ibn Uyayna, Ata ibn Abi Rabah, Ata ibn Yasar. If it's correct, we take it. Right. In any event, the last class we started the chapter, the section related to water, Babu Ahkam Miyah, which is in the chapter about purification. We talked about the reason that the scholars, the way that the reason the scholar took this particular way in discussing the ahkam, the rulings, the legislation related to actions, and so on and so forth. And we talked about how water is pure and it cleans from najasat and hadith. Water cleans filthy things, whether those filthy things be like defecation or urine or najasat, and it removes hadith, which is a person can use it to make wudu or ghusl. A person can use it to make wudu or ghusl. Barakallahu fikum. And that water was created pure. Water was created pure, whether it comes from the sea or the lakes or the brooks or the streams. It's pure. And we talked about how the author said that you cannot clean najasat, or you can only clean najasat with water. You can only clean. So water is used for two things. One, removing what's called hadith. In other words, making wudu and making ghusl. And that's that you can only use water for that. That's not even right. That's clear. Right. If you have water, you have to you use water. If you have water, enough water, you use water. If you don't, you make a tayammum, and we're gonna get to that inshallah. the other issue, or the other thing that water is for cleaning najasat, which are like urine, feces, and the like. The author, he says that you can only use water to clean these things. You can only use water to clean. Like if you have some of these things on your clothes or couch or car seat or whatever, you can only use water. And he mentioned some of the ikhtilaf. He mentions some of the ikhtilaf that you can. Some of the scholars say that you can use other things other than water, right? And the author, he says this is the correct position, that you can only use water. But he said he mentions that some of the other scholars say you can use other things other than water, right? And this is a narration on Imam Malik, Imam Ahmed, an old position of Imam Shafi'i, and this is the position of Shaykh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah, right? And this is the position I learned from my teacher, Scott the Noble, Sheikh Mahir Zahir Qahtani Hafidhullah Ta'ala. And that's based on the hadith, two hadith we talked about, hadithan, one where the Prophet ﷺ instructed us, if we come to the masjid with sandals on or some other footwear that we're going to wear into the masjid, he talking to his companions, look at them. If you find najasa, then rub the sandals together. And the other one is the hadith about women letting their garments drag. If the garment is if it comes in contact with najasa, it coming in contact with other things and dirt and so on and so forth will purify it. Then we talked about water. If water reaches a quantity called qullatan, Allahu alam, the exact quantity of qullatan. I'm gonna try to find it out in the following weeks, but it's about 200 liters. Different estimates. There are different estimates, but it's about 200 liters, which is about 57 gallons. That's if you go with the estimate of 200 liters, right? 57 gallons. That's one estimate. That's just one estimate. There's other estimates. So this amount, which is called kullatan, if the water is this amount, or the water is a flowing, if the water is flowing, it does not become najis. No najasa can cause it to become najis, except if the najasa changes the color, the taste, or the smell of the water. Other than that, it does not become najis by simply mixing with najasa. That's because of the hadith of Abdullah bin Umar, where he said, if water إذا بلغ الماء قلتين لم يحمل الخبث, if water reaches the qullatan, this quantity, or qullatain, it does not become najis. it does not become najis, right? In another narration, another wording, lam yanjus, it doesn't become najis, right? And we talked about the Sheikh saying, يعني أنه إذا لاقته النجاسة, if it comes in contact with najasa, it does not become, or water that is some 50 gallons, 51 gallons, based on the estimate of it being 200 liters. If the water is 50 gallons, it does not become najis by simply coming in contact with najasa, except if one of the characteristics of the water changes. If the color changes, if the taste of the water changes, if the smell of the water changes by najasa, it becomes najis. If the water comes in contact with najasa and the color or the taste or the smell change, that water is considered filthy. In other words, you can't use it to make wudu. You can't use it to remove najasa. Right? You can't use it. Also, we talked about if the water is flowing water, it doesn't become najis. If it comes in contact with najasa, it doesn't become najis. Except if one of the characteristics of that water is changed, meaning the color, the taste, or the smell. The Sheikh, he also mentioned that so the change, if the taste, the smell, or the color change, the water is no longer najasa. That's the issue of ijma'. There's a consensus, and that, as the Sheikh mentioned, this consensus was mentioned by Ibn Mundhir, as well as Ibn Taymiyyah. Type. The Sheikh, he says that he mentioned, this is all a review. So based on the hadith of Ibn Umar, if the water is qullatan, if the water is a quantity called qullatan, if it's this quantity, it doesn't from that hadith is that if it's less than that, it becomes najis as well. The Sheikh, he said this is not correct because there's another hadith that opposes this inference. And the principle is that the hadith, first let's talk about the hadith. The hadith is the hadith of Abi Sa'id, where the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, "Al-ma'u tahurun." Water is pure. Water is pure. Lam yunajjisuhu, la yunajjisuhu shay'un. Nothing causes the water to become najis. So the principle is that if the inferred understanding of a hadith opposes what's explicitly mentioned in the hadith, that inferred understanding is rendered null. It's not counted. It's not given any credence. Right? If the Prophet ﷺ said, if water reaches the qullatain, it does not become najis. What you can understand from that is that water that's less than qullatain can be caused to become najis if it comes in contact with najasa. However, that understanding is rendered null because there's a hadith that opposes that understanding. And that hadith is water is pure and it does not, nothing causes it to become najis. Okay. The Sheikh, he says this concept of the qullatain is about if the water is not in a container, some kind of container or dish. This applies as long as the water is not in a container. Right? The less than the qullatain. I believe that's what the Sheikh is saying. هذا إذا كان الماء في غير الأواني. أما إذا كان الماء قليلا في الأواني ولاقته النجاسة فإنه يراق. Right? So we're talking about water that's less than a qullatain. If water is less than a qullatain and it's not in a it's in a container. If the water is less than the qullatain and it's in a container and it comes in contact with I believe the Sheikh is saying either if it's less or if it's more, but it's in some kind of container, right? And it comes in contact with najasa, it should be poured out because of the hadith. The Sheikh, he says, because of the hadith about the dog drinking in the water. The Prophet ﷺ said that the water should be poured out. It's narration. This is a narration with Imam Malik. It's the position of Imam Shafi'i. No, sorry. This hadith is in Sahih Muslim. Pardon me. This hadith is in Sahih Muslim. And then lastly, from last week, he said that the hadith of the qullatain, about the qullatain, the benefit of it is that the water, a small amount of water should be taken care of. You should take care of the water because it's possible that the water can become najis by coming in contact with najasa, and you don't even know. But in any event, if the one of the characteristics of the water changes, the taste, the color, the smell, then of course the water is najis. If not, the water is still pure. The Sheikh, the author, Ibn Qudama rahimahullah ta'ala, he says, والقلتان ما قارب 108 أرطال دمشقي بالدمشقي. He kind of explains what the qullatan is. The Sheikh Abdul Aziz Rajihi, he said this is their quantification, measuring of the qullatain. He said it is close to 5 qirab. And he says some of the scholars measured the qullatain as a sort of the amount of water, the volume of water that it would take to fill a space that is a dhira' by a dhira', a hand span, length, width, and height. Type. In any event, the author Ibn Qudama rahimahullah ta'ala, he says إذا طبخ الماء إذا طبخ في الماء ما ليس بطهور وكذلك ما خالطه فغلب على اسمه أو استعمل في رفع حدث سلب طهوريته. If something is cooked in water that is not tahur, or something is mixed with water that changes the name changes what you would call that the final result, right? If something that is impure is cooked in water, something that is impure is cooked in water. And something that does not cause purification is cooked in water. Something that does not cause purification is cooked in water. Or something changes the name of that water. So you mix something with it and it's no longer called water. Or if water is used to remove hadith, the in this water, the result of these situations can no longer be used to make wudu and ghusl. The Sheikh, he explains, إذا طبخ في الماء شيء طاهر فإنه يسلب طهوريته مطلقا على ما ذهب إليه المؤلف. The Sheikh, he says, if something that is tahir, it's clean, it's not najas, right? It's clean. Something clean is cooked in water. It removes it removes the ability, for lack of a better term, of this water to be used for wudu and ghusl. The Sheikh, he says, and this is according to the position of the mu'allif. He says, however, what is correct, أن هذا لا يسلبه طهوريته. What's correct is that this does not cause the water. It does not cause the water. This does not prevent you from being able to make wudu with that water or ghusl. The Sheikh, he says, إلا إذا ارتفع اسم الماء عنه, except if the water is no longer called ma, it's no longer called water after you finish. For example, the Sheikh, he says, كما لو طبخ فيه مثلا زعفران. Saffron, if saffron is cooked in water, it's no longer فصار لا يسمى ماء, it's no longer called water. وإنما يقال ماء زعفران. It's called saffron water, right? Other examples include if you have water and you, for example, cook some chicken in it, it's no longer called water, right? If you cook chicken in it and then you take the chicken out, that's no longer called water. That might be, you might maybe call it broth. You call it broth, right? Or if you boil some water and you put a tea bag in it and take the tea bag out, it's no longer called water. It's called tea, right? And there are many examples, right? The Sheikh, he says, likewise, if water is mixed with ink, it's no longer called water, it's called ink. So you can't use it to make wudu or ghusl. The Sheikh, he says, if a small amount of water is used to remove hadith, like to make wudu, the water that's left over, the water that is a result of a person making wudu, if it's gathered in one place, right? The water that's left over can't be used to make wudu or ghusl. The Sheikh, he says, this is according to the position of the author and those that agree with him. He said what's correct is that this does not prevent the water from being used to make wudu or ghusl. This does not prevent the water from being used to make wudu or ghusl. And this is the position of Imam Malik and Al-Awza'i and Abu Thawr And the previous statement is the position of the other three imams. The those imams that the madhahib are ascribed to, يعني al-Imam Ahmed wa al-Imam Shafi'i and al-Imam Abu Hanifa. طيب. The Sheikh, he says, in summary, water, according to the author, yani according to Ibn Qudama, is three categories. It's three categories. طهور يرفع الحدث. A category called طهور, a category which removes the hadith, a category that you can use to make wudu and ghusl. Another category that you can't use to make wudu and ghusl, but it's still pure, but you just can't use it to make wudu or ghusl. And a third category, which is najis, right? The Sheikh, he says, what's correct is that the water is two categories. Water that you can use to make wudu and water that you can't. So there's no third category. Once again, the Sheikh, he says, according to the author, water is three categories. According to Ibn Qudama al-Maqdisi, rahimahullah ta'ala, in this book here, water is three categories. Tuhur, which is water you can use to make wudu and ghusl. Tahir, which is water that you can use, but you can't use it to make wudu and ghusl. You can use it for other things. And najas, water which is filthy. The Sheikh, he says, what's correct? The correct position is that water is two categories. Water that you can use to make wudu and ghusl, and water which is tahur, and najis. And this is the position, according to the author, this is one of the positions of Imam Ahmed, and this is the position of Shaykh al-Islam Taymiyyah. This is the position of many of the people of the Hanafi madhab, and this is one of the narrations of Al-Imam Malik. Once again, the water being two categories is one of the positions mentioned by Al-Imam Malik, one of the positions mentioned by Al-Imam Ahmed, the position of many of the people, the scholars of the Hanafi madhab, and the position of Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah, rahimahumullah jami'an. May Allah have mercy on all of them. The author Ibn Qudama rahimahullah ta'ala, he says وإذا شك في طهارة الماء أو غيره ونجاسته بنى على اليقين. If a person has doubt about whether water is pure, water or other than water is pure, or najis, the person builds on what he's certain about. He or she is certain about. The person builds on what they're certain about. This Sheikh Abdul Aziz Raji, hafidhullah ta'ala, he says, إذا شك في طهورية الماء أو نجاسته. A person is unsure. If a person has doubt about whether some water that he has or she has is pure, has doubts. فإنه يبني على اليقين. The person builds on what he's certain about. The person goes on, يعني proceeds based on his certainty. فإن كان عنده يقين بأن هذا ماء طهور لكن شك هل وقعت فيه نجاسة أو لم تقع فيه نجاسة. A person has some water and he knows that, okay, this water is pure, or he knew that the water was pure, but he has doubt about whether najasa fell into the water somehow, some way. He's not sure. The Sheikh, he says, فإنه يبني على اليقين. The person يعني builds on what he's certain about. The person acts based on what he's certain about. Right? In this situation, وهو أنه طهور ولا يعتبر نجسا ولا يعتبره نجسا. In this situation, the certainty is about that the water is pure. The certainty is that the water is pure. And he shouldn't consider the water najis. So, for example, a person has, let's say, a cat in his house. And let's say the person's outside washing his car. And he just put the water in the bucket. And he left the bucket. He put some water in the bucket and he walked away to go get the soap and the rags and so on and so forth. When he comes back to the car, near the car, to the bucket of water, there's a dog close by. And of course, we know that the saliva of the dog is najis. The saliva of the dog is najis. If a dog drinks from your water, you have to pour it out and you have to clean the container, bucket, whatever. And according to the sunnah, 8 times, one of those times with dirt. In any event, there's a dog. And the dog is looking at him and he's looking at the dog. And he doesn't know if the dog drank from the water or not. Or let's say the dog is walking away. Right, the person puts the water, walks away to go get the rag and the soap, comes back, and the dog, from a distance, he can see the dog, and then the dog runs away as the person comes back toward the car in the water. He doesn't know if the dog drank from the water. He couldn't see the dog close up to see if the dog had water on his face, around his mouth, on his chin. He couldn't see, just dog looking at him, then the dog ran away. The Sheikh is saying this water would be considered pure. This water would be considered pure, not najis. The Sheikh, he says, likewise the opposite. إذا كان يعلم أن هذا الماء فيه نجاسة لكن شك هل زالت النجاسة أو لم تزل وهل أخرجت أم لم تخرج فإنه يبقى نجسا فيعمل بالأصل فإذا شك في نجاسة الماء وطهوريته يعمل بالأصل. He said likewise the opposite. A person has some water. He knows that the water is najis. He knows that the water is najis. He knows that the water is najis. But he's not sure if the najasa. He knows that the water is najis, but he's not sure if the najasa was removed or not. Is the water najis, or is it no longer najis? Was the najasa taken out or not taken out? The Sheikh, he says this water is still najis, because that's what you're sure about. That's the certainty. That's the foundation that you build upon. That's the foundation that's what you know, and you go from there. Right? So if a person has doubt about whether water is najis or pure, if the water is filthy or pure, the Sheikh, he says the person acts based on what he's certain about. The author says, قال المؤلف رحمه الله تعالى وإن خفي موضع النجاسة من الثوب أو غيره غسل ما يتيقن به غسلها. if a person gets some najasa on something, let's say his pant leg or her pant leg or the sleeve of his jacket or her jacket, person gets some najasa on the jacket sleeve, right? And then the najasa is still there, but it's a type of najasa that you can't. Let's say the coat is black or something like that, and najasa is like, urine or something. The coat is a dark color, and it's on a sleeve, and you don't know the exact place of that najasa. Khalas, it dried up. It dried up, and you don't know exactly where it is. The author, Ibn Qudama, rahimahullah ta'ala, he says that the person washes enough of the whatever it is, in this case, a jacket, the example we're using, a jacket, he washes enough of that thing to be sure that he washed the najasa. The Sheikh, he says, أي إذا خفي موضع النجاسة من الثوب أو غيره. If the place of the najasa and a thobe or other than the thobe khafia disappears and you can't see it, it's like obscure. غسل ما يتيقن أنه أزال النجاسة. The person washes enough of the thobe, or in this case the jacket, so that he is sure or she is sure that they removed the najasa. Right? Person has on a jacket, some urine somehow got on the jacket. The person is like, all right, I'm gonna wash it in a second. The urine dries up. The person doesn't know exactly if it's near the elbow of the sleeve, near the end of it, close to the shoulder, near the wrist. But for example, the person knows that it's on the inner side of the he knows which side of the sleeve it's on. The front side of the back side, for lack of a better term, right? The person washes the whole area so that they know that they removed the najasa. The Shaykh, he says, فإذا شك أن النجاسة مثلا في وسط الثوب. The person knows that the najasa is in the middle of the thobe, but doesn't know exactly where. فإنه يغسل الوسط كله. The person washes the entire middle of the thobe. حتى يتيقن أن النجاسة زالت. Until the person is certain that the najasa was removed. The author, he goes on to say, if a person إذا اشتبه ماء طاهر بنجس ولم يجد غيرهما تيمم وتركهما، وإن اشتبه طهور بماء بطاهر توضأ من كل واحد منهما. If a person has water that is tahir, in other words, the category according to the author that you can't use to make wudu, and water that is najis, and he doesn't have other than those two. Yani a person has some water, pure water, and he's not, and he has some, yani, a person has some water that is pure and some other water that is najis, and he only has these two. The person would make tayammum, and he would avoid both of the two things of water. if the person has water that is tahur and water that is tahir. So in the first situation, he has water that can't be used to make wudu and water that is najas. Neither one of these can be used. The sheikh, he said, the author says you make tayammum and avoid both of the water. Then the author said, Ibn Qudama rahimahullah ta'ala, he continues, he says, if you have water that is tahur, the category that you can use to make wudu and tahara, and the second category that's pure but you can't use it to make wudu, the person makes wudu from each one of these two. Tayyib. About the first two examples, the person has water that is tahir and water that is najis. Water that's pure, is clean, but you can't use it to make wudu, and you have water that is najis, which you can't use for anything. نجس فإنه يترك ما ويتيمم ولا يحتاج إلى أن يتحرى. Right, the position of the mu'allif, the author, is that you just make tayammum, you leave off both of the types of water, and there's no reason to try to figure, you don't need to try to figure out which is which. The sheikh, he explains, he says, because using water that is najis is haram, and using water that you can't use to make wudu is only obligatory based on knowledge and ability. And that's you don't have knowledge and you don't have ability, so you could fall into haram and you don't know it. Because of that, the scholars, they say la yataharra, the person does not try to figure out which water is pure. Yani, he simply makes tayammum. On the other hand, if you have water that is pure that can be used to make wudu, this is according to Ibn Qudama. Remember, Ibn Qudama said what is three categories: pure, clean water that you can make wudu and ghusl with, clean water that you can't make wudu and ghusl with, and water that is unclean. Ibn Qudama, he says, if you have water that is clean that you can make wudu with, and water that is clean that you can't make wudu with, the person makes wudu from each water, from each of these two containers or whatever of water. The sheikh, he says, إذا كان ماء طهور أخذه من البئر. A person has some water that is pure, clean, that you can use to make wudu. He took it from a well. وعنده ماء طاهر لا يرفع الحدث. And the person has some other clean water, but this is water that you can't use for wudu. It's clean, but you can't use it for your wudu. The sheikh, he says, جمعه من القطرات التي من أعضائه. And he gathered the water from his body parts and so on and so forth, his limbs. Maybe the person washed. He had some water, he washed, and then he gathered the water. He wiped the water off his body into a container or something like that. And he has water. That's one water. The other water that he has is from a well. The sheikh, he says, washtabaha, and these two waters got mixed up. He doesn't know which water is which. وليس عنده دلو يستخرج به من البئر, and the person doesn't have he doesn't have like a bucket or what would you use to get more water out of the well. He doesn't have that, a bucket. We'll call it a bucket, right? وكان هذا الذي معه قليلا لا يكفي ماذا يفعل. And the water that he has is not enough. What should the person do? He said the position of the author is that the person makes wudu, scoops water from here, and then scoops water from here. Right? He washes his face one time with the water from this container and water and he washes his face another time with the water from this container. Wash his face once from the first container, wash his face a second time from the other container. Then he washes his hands. He washes right hand one time from one container, washes right hand another time from another container, from the other container. حتى يتيقن أنه يتوضأ مرة واحدة من الطهور, until the person is sure that he made wudu at least once from the water that was tuhur, the water that's clean that you can make wudu with. That's the position of the author, Ibn Qudama rahimahullah ta'ala. The Sheikh, he says, وَالصَّوَابْ أَنَّ الثَّانِي الَّذِي جَمَعَهُ مِنْ الْقَطَرَاتِ, the one that he took from the drops of water and so on and so forth, the person at the other water that's not from the well, كَذَلِكَ يَرْفَعُ الْحَدَثِ إِذَا الْمَاء يَنْقَسِمُ إِلَى قِسْمَيْنِ. The Sheikh, he says, the other water that's not from the well also removes hadith, because water is only two categories. Because water is only, either it's clean and it removes the hadith. You can either it's clean and you can make wudu and ghusl with it, or it's najis. There's no third category. And we're gonna stop here, inshallah ta'ala. May Allah ta'ala give us success, aid us, give us firmness, help us, make us sincere, purify our hearts, and may Allah ta'ala make us people who only worry about his judgment. We only act to seek Allah ta'ala's pleasure and not the pleasure of the people. May Allah ta'ala make us individuals who are always remembering Allah ta'ala, always concerned about Allah ta'ala's ruling on us, always concerned about earning Allah ta'ala's pleasure and staying away from Allah ta'ala's punishment. May Allah azza wa jalla help us and aid us, give us firmness upon the sunnah of the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and firmness upon the minhaj of the Prophet and his companions, upon their aqidah and their creed. May Allah ta'ala protect us from shirk and kufr, polytheism. May Allah protect us from polytheism, disbelief, hypocrisy, innovation, and the people of these different categories. May Allah ta'ala unite the people of sunnah upon the truth and protect them from partisanship, hizbiyah, and shakhsiyah. May Allah ta'ala gather the Salafis, rectify their affairs, purify their hearts. May Allah ta'ala make us muhsineen, muttaqeen, siddiqeen. Walhamdulillahi rabbi, and we send salat and salams upon the Messenger of Allah, alayhi salatu wassalam. Walhamdulillahi rabbil alameen.